I'm Aryeh Schwartz along with my co-host Rachel Galligan, and welcome to the Winsidr show where it's all about the W. Today, we got more free agency for you. If you like our show, please consider joining our Patreon community. For less than a cup of coffee a month, you can directly show support for the hard work we do covering the W. Today, we got free agency talk coming your way. Yes, we'll talk rumors. Yes, we'll talk fits. Yes, we'll talk about, comments about what's best for players. Obviously, we don't know what's best for players, and they might not even know themselves sometimes. But heck, this is WNBA free agency, and it's time to start chatter. Let's go real quick, Rachel. We broke three big stories, in my opinion, three of the biggest free agency stories so far during the free agency period of 2020. Copper, Bonner, and Astu. All three of them free agents in their own regard. And I think it's time to have a little discussion on them. As we broke earlier this week, Kalea Copper is a restricted free agent. And so what that means is anything that any team can send her an offer. But Chicago has final say of whether or not they're going to match that. It's, as we reported, she's very happy in Chicago, but she is hearing, what the other teams have to offer. But at the end of the day, at least in my opinion, I think it's safe to say when you have a player who's that happy in such an up and coming young roster, I always tend to say that they'll stay versus they'll go. Then another big one is Astu. As everyone knows, to me, she's a one-name player, but she's also a restricted free agent. But she's an interesting one, not necessarily in whether or not she's happy or not happy, but if you just look at, shameless plug, Winsidr has a great WNBA free agency tracker. If you look at it, you'll notice a lot of free agents. And what's going to end up happening, because they have Courtney Vandersloot and Allie Quigley as unrestricted free agents, they're going to be putting a lot of money into them. And they also have to think to the future with this young team that they have and getting some money. Diamond's going to cash out in a couple of years. So you kind of have to plan in advance. So I think Astu could kind of be one of those players who another team offers her big money, possibly even guaranteed money. Remember, 6 players on the roster get a guaranteed contract. And she might be one of those players who, gets a big offer from another team and says, hey, let's try that out. It's my time to get that bag, as they say. And the last and possibly the biggest, Rachel, I'll let you take that one away, DeWanna Bonner.
DeWanna Bonner, yeah. I mean, I think the first thing we need to talk about with these players are how sought after they are, and they're all very different. I think you talk about Copper, who, a lot of teams need pieces that can fit in with anything. They need that versatility. They need length. They need athleticism and defensive ability from a versatility standpoint. And Copper has played exceptionally well these last couple of years. I love her game. She's one of my favorite players to watch. She seems to buy in and fit into, at least from what I've been able to tell, any system. We talk about Astu, same with her. I mean, had a great year last year. That's someone who is extremely sought after with a lot of teams and should be. She's really coming into her own and playing exceptionally well. Again, a piece that can fit into a lot of systems, a lot of versatility there. And then we get to DeWanna Bonner, which, I mean, there was a point last year in 2019, we were talking about Bonner as the leading MVP candidate. And I know you and I are a huge fan of her. I love her game. I think she's playing arguably at points last year at the peak of her career. So Bonner is, in my opinion, versatility at its finest in a lot of ways, and her ability to face up and stretch the floor and what she can do, and kind of, that positionless basketball from her standpoint. But Bonner, looking to potentially make a move from the Phoenix Mercury, and that's interesting. At this point of her career, I think we could speculate a lot of reasons as to what that could be or why, or kind of where she's looking to go. But I think it's safe to say that any team in the league would be interested in bringing her to their team. I know if I'm a GM, I'm doing everything I can to get a DeWanna Bonner on my roster. So I think it's safe to say that she's going to be able to be very selective in terms of where her next team is.
Yeah, no, I completely agree with you. And as we'll get into a little bit later in this episode, I do think that she's one of those players that can take a bottom of the pack team to a middle of the pack, or take a middle of the pack team to conversations of contention, or take a team that's in conversations of contention and really put them as the presumptive, favorite, as it were.
Yeah.
We'll get into that later. A question that I want to pose to you, and I'll give my answer second. How many years does DeWanna Bonner have left? And when I say that, it's a two-part question. How many top talent years? Because if you ask me, she is a top 3 to top 5 player in this league. If you drop her past top 5, I will slap you. She and to me, in no specific order, it's Stewie, Bonner, and EDD. Again, no specific order, so don't shame me on that, Rachel. And it's also funny just because they have such a similar skill set and style and positioning. But talk to me. How many years of top quality ball, and how many years left in the league?
That's a hard one. I mean, we look at like players like Sue Bird. It's like she's got another 10 years in her, it feels like. DeWanna Bonner seems like she's in exceptional shape. I mean, she's like a superwoman. So it's hard for me to answer that question. But just from an outsider's perspective and a coach's eye, and you just kind of look at, at 32 years old, I would say she's got 4 to 5 years left in the league. 3 to 4 of those being, at least 3 being, top level basketball. Good is if you would say that would be my guess. I could be being a little bit gracious on that, but I just really think that she has some superhuman qualities to her in the way she plays. She's not your average 32-year-old in the WNBA, and she's done a fantastic job of taking care of herself, and that shows. And last year, the way we watched her play at 31, 32 in 2019, I mean, she was one of the best players in the league. So I think it's easy to say she has at least 3 to 4 years of really good basketball left in her.
Yeah, no, I mean, I view it slightly differently. No surprise, Rachel and I don't see eye to eye on this. I would say, I do see her as, and it sounds ridiculous when you list her age, but I think we're going to see 4 to 6 more years from her. And it really depends on when that drop off of top tier game kind of falls off, and then that's really going to be a decision maker for her. But with that being said, it's kind of crazy. I would say 2 to 3 more years of top level play. Now, that being said, I also think, and obviously I'm a guy who doesn't have any children and knows nothing about this, so I'm completely out of my element, so shame me about this. But I do think, like, after giving birth, we saw a fight and a drive from her that we didn't necessarily see before that. And that just gives me more and more incentive to say that she could play 6 more years in this league. Obviously, God willing, she stays healthy. But like, that's just the fight and kind of that push that I've seen in the past couple of years from her that has blown me away and made me, the one of the biggest members of her hype train.
I am too. I am too. I want her to play another 15 years. So I mean, that's a huge question mark at this point. But if you take a step back and you take the personality out of it and you just look at numbers, that's kind of really the only thing I'm basing it on. So, like I said, I really feel like she has some superhuman qualities to her. I really mean that from a competitive and athletic standpoint, that I think she could do this for a really long time. So anyway, next topic. Let's go.
Next topic, potential fits for Chicago Sky's free agents. And the reason we're talking about them specifically is, I don't know if you noticed, but 2 of the 3 people that we talked about in our breaking news segment are from the Chicago Sky. But we're going to add a few more to it. Obviously, we're not going to talk about Quigley. We're not going to talk about Vandersloot. Like, there's no reason to talk about them. I would be shocked and jump in a frozen lake if they're not with the Chicago Sky this coming season. So Sky fans, calm down. I don't think they're going anywhere. Let's start off with Dulcin. And we're not talking about, what we're hearing or anything like that. We're just talking about ideal fits for their style of play. And when I look at Dulcin, honestly, there's only one, maybe two teams that stick out in my mind. And the team, like, first and foremost, that just sticks out based on the roster and style of play. Obviously, there's some question marks on what they're going to do in the future. Dallas Wings. And Rachel, I'm curious what your thoughts are on where Dulcin can fit.
I think that's a good fit. I haven't thought much about this since you posed the question right before we started recording, so I'm just kind of quickly give my initial thoughts. But yeah, I could see,
gut reactions with Rachel.
Yeah, I could see Dallas, and kind of the way she can stretch the floor and the way she shoots the ball. That their need for size. I could see potentially Indiana. And kind of whatever direction they're going to build with this young team, bringing some veteran size in there. Those are kind of the two that come to mind with me. That's all I got.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. Kayla Alexander is an interesting one because I think she's the type of player that could really fit on a lot of different rosters.
Really anywhere.
But I don't, right? Like, she really could, but I don't think that I don't think she pulls the attention of, like, a team being like, she could fit anywhere and we really want her to fit with us, which I think is sad and, disheartening if you're a huge fan of her. But honestly, I could see her. I don't think there's a team that I'm just like, no, she can't play with.
No, I agree. I think she can fit all 12.
We could, yeah, right. We could have probably also left that off. I'm not saying she can be a starter on any of these teams, but I do think that, like, coming off the bench, she is a solid player that could really do damage for a variety of teams. Like you were saying, a lot of teams are looking for keys or looking for role players or for looking for specific things, but not necessarily looking for that big splash in the water. And I think she kind of fits that. Let's talk about Copper. For me, teams that stick out and call me crazy and whatnot, but Vegas, Seattle, and Phoenix are kind of the teams that jump out to me. Obviously, there's other teams that I think she would fit fine on. As we reported, I think there's like 6 teams interested in her. That being said, to me, I'm not even saying that these are 3 teams that are part of those 6 teams. I'm just saying, I just think her style of play could be quite spotlighted, as I like to say and make up random phrases, with those 3 teams. What about you? What do you think?
Yeah, I think you have to add really Minnesota into that. That's probably my top one for her and her fit and style of play. That would be a really good match in my book.
Yeah, no, I'll give you that. I mean, I there was someone on Twitter, I think it was Ben, was it Ben W?
Ben W, shout out Ben W.
Shout out to Ben W. He had a good point, just of her being a little bit more of a wing, and kind of playing in a position that they do have some depth. I think it's easy, and this isn't me coming at you, Rachel, so I apologize if it sounds like that. I do think, I don't view her as like a true point guard or a true, I at least the way I look at her is more 2-3. For those who understand what that means, more so than a 1-2. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I'm crazy. That's just how I view it. And I think the Lynx are more in desperate need of a 1-2. Mm-hmm. But that also obviously has effects of if Zandy's coming back and a plethora of other things. Let's talk about a Stu. Now, Stu is a hot commodity, a hot topic, because I think she's almost like a Damiris Dantas of last year, where, similarly, Minnesota was able to steal her because Atlanta couldn't match a guaranteed contract and offer up as much money necessarily. And I think a Stu could possibly be a player like that. I think a Stu's the type of player who, and we're going to get into this in a moment when we talk about Bonner, but she's the type of player that can really harness a team, because if you look at some of the top teams in this league, you have DC that has, the 3 towers of Emma, EDD, and LaToya Sanders. And then you go over to Seattle, which has the 2 towers with Howard and Stewie. And then Phoenix, which probably won't have their towers anymore, of BG and Bonner. And you kind of start to look and you realize that, like, you need the ability to match up. Like, a Stu going to a Connecticut team and pairing up with Jonquel, for me, that's almost the last thing missing for a Connecticut team to really become the favorite, to really take that next leap, is having the ability. This isn't any shade towards Alyssa Thomas. I just think, having Alyssa Thomas in a position where you have a little bit more flexibility and she's not undersized could be a huge benefit for this team in a championship run this season. What are your thoughts?
No, I agree with all your points. I mean, you talk about the size of a Stu at 6'5", the length, the versatility. Then this is a player who's, she's been in the league since 2014, played on and off, been in there for a total of 4 seasons. But if we look at what she did in 2019, everything is trending upwards. She's kind of hitting that peak of her career where, she's really playing with a ton of confidence. And you talk about a rim protector. We talk about the size and the length, that one that is extremely hard to come by. And then all the teams that are going to compete for a championship in this league have to have that type of rim protector, or to some degree on the interior. And so she brings that. Maybe not as dominant as we talk about, BG or, Liz Cambage or, other things like that, but she has a certain, she's agile, she's athletic. And you look at the way she's played and everything has trended upwards. Everything that she's doing from a scoring standpoint, from a minutes standpoint, from a confidence standpoint, her shooting percentage has continued to increase. So, if I'm a GM and I'm looking at her and everything that comes with her, it's like, man, this is a huge piece of the puzzle that we can play a number of different ways. And like you said, I mean, to your point, it really does help elevate any team in this league to that next level. That's exactly why she is so sought after right now.
Yeah. Hey, when you agree with me, I think it's sounding quite wise. All right, we're going to talk about a few players who we feel could really bump a team to a title favorite or to a team that's in title contention. And we're going to start with the obvious. And I think, in my opinion, I've stressed this leading up to the free agency period and everything more. DeWanna Bonner. I think any team she goes to is going to be a huge addition. But that being said, I do think there's a few teams that she makes a much bigger jump for them. The first team that comes to mind in the idea of going from not a contender to being a contender or being in contention is Minnesota. And the reason I say that is because as much as I've harped on the thought of BG kind of clogging it, I do think her with this young Lynx roster and just pairing her with the likes of Sylvia Fowles is scary. And me, I am much higher on Sylvia than I am on BG. So I think that would put them into contention just to have 2 top players in this league on the same roster. The other team, Las Vegas. I mean, just imagine her, Asia, McBride, or Plum. Obviously one of them would likely have to go. And then also with Liz Cambage, I mean, that is just a scary sight that says, hey, watch out, DC, we're coming from you. And then, Connecticut Sun. I keep bringing them up because having another tall, athletic player can do so much for them, because I think we saw in the finals, one of their biggest issues was when Emma came in and when you had those big 3, and how are you going to combat that when you have your one big and then you have Alyssa Thomas, who is amazing, freak of nature, super skilled player. But I mean, what are you going to do there? It just size and height is just a huge issue there. Anybody else that sticks out for you when it comes to DeWanna?
Well, I love your point about Connecticut. I think if Bonner were to end up in Connecticut, they immediately become my preseason favorite. I think in my mind, because I think that's a missing piece that they don't have. I don't know if that's possible. We're just speculating, guys. I'm not trying to drop any hints or anything. We literally we're just speculating at this point. So like that's an example of me of Bonner goes from one place to instantly takes. We're already going to talk about Connecticut as being a top 2 team. Instant contender, but that takes her, in my opinion, to a favorite. I really think she'd be a phenomenal fit in Chicago. I think she'd be a phenomenal fit in Minnesota. I think the fit in Minnesota is eerily good. I think that would just be really fun to watch. I have no idea if it could happen. I think a place like Dallas, as they're building the franchise there, and they're Brian Agler is trying to get all these pieces in order. They need size. They're obviously we've talked about Skylar Diggins, and it's to be determined where she's going to go and what's going to happen there. But bringing in like a franchise type player, a name, a vet, someone who's won a championship to an organization like Dallas would be a huge shot in the arm. I don't think you could talk about that as saying, okay, now they're a contender. They're not, but they're now going from a bottom part of the league to, middle to upper part of the WNBA with the addition of Bonner. So I'm curious to see, like I said, we could go through all these teams and really break down where Bonner would fit. She could fit anywhere. And if anyone's not going after her, I think they're crazy. But those are the ones to me, like, I think in that group that we just mentioned, it's going to have to be one of those that makes the most sense. I think it's just going to come down to Bonner agreeing to the right place. And at this point in her career, what is it that she wants? Does she want money? Does she want a championship? Does she want to be the go-to player? Is it location based? Those are questions that we don't know as outsiders looking in. And I can tell you what, though, it's going to be this is going to be the biggest news of the free agency for sure.
I agree, and I like that you were talking about Skylar and Dallas, and that's a perfect segue to Skylar Diggins-Smith. The teams that come to my mind is first on the list, Minnesota. Again, I don't think they become a title favorite, but I do think you have to talk about them in contention if Skylar goes there, because for me, the biggest issue regarding Minnesota is the inability to get the ball to Sill down low. We saw that the guards were not able to do that. Skylar has shown that she has that ability to do it with bigs throughout her whole career, and having a big name like that and someone who can put up points and someone who, I don't know how I can say this with a straight face, but I will. Skylar Diggins-Smith is underrated, and in her past seasons in the W, I think should have been an MVP discussion, but was not. Another team in my mind is Las Vegas. You put Skylar there, no offense to Kelsey Plum or any of the other players over there. I just think, if you can get that trade, if you can get that movement, that would be great for them and kind of upgrade them. Not to say that Kelsey Plum might is never going to be as good as Skylar, but I think currently for 2020, I think it would. Also, crazy, but might be amazing. Imagine Chelsea Gray and Skylar Diggins on the same team together with that star-studded roster in LA. Yeah. I mean, talk about being a title favorite. And also Phoenix. Phoenix for years has been trying to find a good starting point guard. And obviously you put her on that roster. Now, whether or not Bonner's there, that adds another wrinkle into this theory. But still, I think you add her there with BG, with Diana Taurasi kind of on her last leg, and with some of the other young players that they have. And you got to start talking about them. Not about title favorite necessarily, but definitely contention. Rachel, any other team I didn't list there that you think Skylar would?
No, I think I would throw in Atlanta.
Oh.
Yeah, we haven't talked about them. They're like really flying under the radar. Like nobody's talking about some of this stuff with Atlanta. Of course, I know we're going to get to Angel here in a little bit, but Atlanta is a team that I think kind of needs to shake up the roster quite a bit after last year. Needs to really undergo some big time changes. As you guys hear my dog chewing on its squeaky toy in the background. Anyway, so I would maybe throw that in there, but I agree. Like talking about LA, talking about Vegas, talking about Phoenix, really exciting to think about, Skylar in any of those places. And I have to imagine at this point in her career, she wants to be at a place like that.
Yeah, I agree. And the last one, before we sign off for the day, and this might be a hot take, but they call me Hot Take Aryeh. Shakina Stricklen. And the reason I say that is because what we saw from the top teams in this league this past year is, for the most part, the ability to shoot it from deep. And I know everyone likes to talk about how she was the weakness on Connecticut's defense and blah, 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 and all that jazz. I used to hate on Shakina all the time, and she shut me up with her game. I think it was 2 years ago.
I love me some Shakina Stricklen.
She is just a straight baller. You throw her on Minnesota, and obviously, I'm a little bit biased. I'm originally from Minnesota, so I'm not going to lie about that. I'm upfront. I'm honest about that. Maybe saying all these players going to Minnesota puts them in discussion of contention. I don't think necessarily any of these players I do not think Minnesota will be a title favorite coming this season, but could they be in talks of contention, on the outside rim of contention? I think so. If you get a couple big names, adding Shakina, a big body, a big frame, a big shooter, a big time shooter, does it for me. Las Vegas, adding her. I mean, her from three, adding that to Las Vegas's arsenal, I think would be ridiculous. Might even put them to title favorite. Throwing her to LA. I mean, again, LA I think needs to shoot more threes. I don't think necessarily they're in search of her or her position, but I think also her. And then Phoenix again. I mean, I'm just repeating stuff, but Seattle also. Her going to Seattle, I think, could be good. People are looking at me like I'm crazy. Seattle doesn't need anything. Stewie's coming back. Sue's coming back. All that jazz. I would not be surprised if we saw them move to get a nice wing before this season hits.
I'm just going to say ditto because you did such a great job of breaking that down.
Snaps. Well, we don't have to say anything more after that. We believe the players of the W and its community deserve the same in-depth analysis and respect that men's sports receive on a daily basis. With that in mind, please consider joining our Patreon community to help support us in the hard work that we do. We did just release a very in-depth detailed salary cap for each team in the league, exclusive for Patreon subscribers. So subscribe now and get that. And our graphics guy, the graphic god, will make you a custom WNBA graphic for your favorite team or player. Have a great one.